Okay, so I know I've said this before that sometimes I make little notes to myself of things I want to make a video about, but sometimes it's just like little story time videos that, some of the little topics are just not something to make an entire video about, but maybe if I just kind of clip them all together, I could make one long video. But of course, if I'm going to tell you a story, there should be like a lesson learned, right? So part of what I had in mind was to talk about stuff that has to do with work situations, getting along with coworkers, things like that. That, like I said, I hope there's a lesson learned from my little anecdote story. So let's get into it.
Okay, so the first rule really has to do with if you have a coworker that just is always screwing up, that everything they touch they break, how they never seem to do their job, somehow you get stuck having to like clean up their mess. This is where, you might be inclined to complain about that coworker. But of course, what I'm going to suggest you do is try to always say something nice about that coworker. Now, you don't have to say it to the coworker, but maybe just every now and then, maybe drop some comments to management about how great that coworker is doing, even if it's not true. Because this way, when you actually do complain and say, hey, this guy really screwed something up, then they'll be more likely or inclined to listen to you because they know that you're not being like one sided, you're not targeting someone, you're not always calling this person out. Nobody wants to listen to a complainer. So if, all you're doing is complain about this one employee all the time, they really start to like turn off. They don't want to listen to it anymore. They're done listening to your complaints. So you really need to balance it out with, saying some good things the person did and some not so good things the person did. So then that way it looks like you are a more non-biased individual when it comes to talking about your coworkers. That's, playing into the whole human psychology of it all, because we all know this coworker is a screw up, right? We all know we want the coworker to quit. All they do is screw things up. But the thing is, there's a point where nobody wants to listen to someone who's just constantly complaining, especially when you're complaining about the same person over and over. Now, of course, they should listen to you and they should realize that this coworker is screwing up on their own, but sometimes they don't. So, as far as you thinking, well, once I tell on the coworker that he's really going to get it, no, that's not how it works. Usually, if you're the one who complains about something, it'll come back on you somehow. They'll ask you, well, what are you doing to solve the problem? What are you doing to involve yourself in this? And it's like, maybe you should just stay out of it and not complain to management. But the point is that if every now and then you kind of throw in some compliments, say what a great job this coworker is doing, and then maybe one time say, you know what, they kind of screwed this up, and it's too bad that we had to do so much extra work to fix it. They are usually more inclined to listen to what you have to say, just from my personal experience. Okay, so this second story has to do more with like intimidation in the workplace. So I had been at a job for a while and they wanted me to, I guess, change positions, which meant I would still have to be trained. So even though I kind of had been there a while, knew my way around, I did need to be trained in a certain area. And the person that was training me was actually someone who hadn't worked there for very long. So in a sense, I had worked there longer than her. I did have seniority over her, if you want to call it that. I did probably have a lot more knowledge than she did, but she was going to be training me in this certain aspect of the job that would be something new that I would be taking on in my role at the job. So maybe you can kind of relate to what I'm saying. Don't mean to make the story more convoluted than it needs to be. So basically, I meet up with her. We're supposed to have like one-on-one time to do the training. Not much training took place. I feel like it was more like her just gossiping to me about things that had nothing to do with work. Her telling me about different people at work, things telling me things about her personal life that I obviously really don't care about. I'm there to work and I'm there to learn. And so a couple hours passed by and then the manager came and asked how things were going. And so I was honest because I was like, well, I really haven't learned much, we've spent all this time together, but she really hasn't been focusing on training me much. So then he was like, oh really? Like as if he didn't believe me, as if, I don't know, why would I make that up? So he was like, well, let's call her in here and see what she has to say about that. So I'm like, okay, let's call her in. I almost felt like him saying that he was going to bring her into the conversation was somehow supposed to like scare me or threaten me in some way to make me change my story to be like, oh no, let's not call her in because actually she has been training me. But I thought, yeah, let's call her in. Let's ask her why she's telling me about all this stuff going on in her personal life and hasn't trained me at all whatsoever in this job role. I'm not scared. I have no problem. So, he like calls her over and he was like, so, I heard that you really haven't been doing any training, and is that true? And of course she was said, no, that's not true. We went over everything, and like we went over this and that. And I'm sitting there thinking like, no, we didn't. Like, plus, if we did, then wouldn't I know how to do it? I mean, like, you're throwing me into a job. I kind of need to know how to do the job. But in my mind, I'm thinking, like, she's lying. She's lying to the manager. I mean, she knows what went on. I would know what went on. The only one who doesn't know what went on is the manager. And of course, for some reason, the manager is believing her over me, and I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just here to get trained on my new role within the company. So then I felt like now I was like, the way he set this up, it was like he's kind of like pitting her against me against her, which I don't really appreciate that because I felt like all I want to know is how to do the job so I can continue doing my job. And it's funny how it turned into this whole other thing where as if it was seemed to be insinuating that I was lying, that I was choosing not to learn the role or the tasks, that this other person was such a great employee, and that's not true. It's things like that happen in the workplace where I felt like, you need to learn to stand up for yourself, because if someone tries to intimidate you or tries to be like, oh really, well, let's call a meeting, let's see what they have to say, don't back down. No, you know the truth of what happened, so stand by it. Stand up for yourself, because more than likely no one else is going to stand up for you, so you got to stand up for yourself. And if there is a confrontation, I know a lot of people don't like confrontation. They probably like try to run away from confrontation or back out of it somehow. Don't. Stand your ground. Make it known. This is what happened. You can twist it however you want, but this is actually what happened. And so that's kind of my advice on that story. That leads me into my next story, which has more to do with negotiating.
Okay, so my next topic, negotiation. Okay, let me give you a scenario. Let's say that you wanted to get paid $3 more an hour. So you go to your boss and you say, give me a $3 raise or I quit. Well, more than likely, your boss is going to say, well, then I guess this is your resignation. They're going to accept your resignation right then and there. That's not much of a negotiation, right? Negotiation, typically you go to your boss, you say, I want to make $3 more an hour. They say, how about two? You say, how about 250? And you negotiate. You go back and forth. But the rule to remember in negotiation is you have to be willing to walk away. And so what does that mean? Well, that means just as much as you're committed to really getting that $3 extra an hour for a raise, you also have to be 100% committed to willing to just walk off the job, quit on the spot, start looking for a new job, go through the whole process of applying for a job. In your mind, you have to like commit 100% to, you can't just commit to, I'm really going to get that $3 raise. You got to commit all the way to thinking it through in your mind. Are you willing to just, take it or leave it? Give me the raise or I quit. Okay. Like I said, that's not much of a negotiation. If you are able to negotiate, you can also think of other things to negotiate where your boss says, sorry, can't afford to pay you anything extra. I guess you're going to quit. You can try to negotiate other things such as like extra health benefits. Maybe instead of 1 week paid holiday vacation, you get 2 weeks. Maybe if your company operates on a bonus schedule or a certain percentage point of how much you would make for your bonus at the end of the year, or your monthly bonus or whatever that is, maybe you can negotiate a different rate. These are all things to keep in mind. But I think that some people have it in their mind that they're going to walk into their boss, they're going to say, hey, give me $3 more an hour or I quit. And that somehow the boss is going to be like, oh no, don't quit, we need to keep you. Or that you're gonna quit and then a week later they're gonna call you and be like, man, we really miss you, we want to bring you back, we're willing to give you that extra $3. That's usually not how it goes, and I think you know that. But I mean, it has happened to me where I've quit a job and they called me like a couple weeks later and said, we can't find anyone to replace you. We're willing to pay you more if you come back. And a lot of times that's kind of like uncomfortable because you're like, oh, you're willing to pay me more now after I quit? You weren't willing to pay me more before? Or even when you've put in your notice and you tell your job, sorry, I need to quit this job. I found another job that pays more. And they're like, oh, but we'll pay you more. Just stay here. It's like, shouldn't you have been paying me more to begin with? I mean, I shouldn't have to go and find another job and quit this job just to get you to pay me more. So this is why when I mentioned negotiations, of course, negotiations don't just have to be about a job. It can be about being in a relationship. It can be about things you do with your friends and negotiate. Maybe they want to do a certain activity, go watch a certain movie, and you want to watch a totally different movie. You know, you go back and forth with them and you realize, okay, so here's what I want to do. You know, and they'll say, but I want to do this. And then you say, but I don't want to do that. I want to do this. And then you somewhere meet in the middle. And unfortunately, sometimes compromise means nobody's happy because both of you are giving up something you really wanted to do, and now you're doing some other thing, some other like third thing that nobody wanted to do. So I always keep this in mind that when it comes to negotiations, sometimes it's just better to just walk, to say, sorry, this is my final offer. This is where I stand. This is what I want. If you can't give it to me, goodbye. But like I said, your goodbye has to be like a real goodbye. You have to actually get to shuffling out the door and go. Because like I said, as much as you were 100% committed about getting that $3 an hour more a raise, you need to be 100% committed to walking out that door, shuffling your shoes on out of there, and finding a new job. And that comes with struggle, and that comes with, you know, a lot of work you're going to have to put into finding a new job. But sometimes that's what you got to do. You got to do it for what's best for you. And I'm going to leave things here on this note. I got more in the future to talk about, but I hope that I was able to cover a couple of topics. And of course, feel free to leave your feedback in the comments.